Good morning, folks. Hope you all are doing all right since the last time we checked in on each other. So been a little rainy here lately. So it's a little mushy out in the garden, so we're not going to be out in the garden today. And we're not out in the shop today, but I promise you we're going to get back out in that shop. We're going to do some projects. I got a couple knife projects coming up, and we'll do video on those. We got one knife for our giveaway coming up. So today, I knew it was going to be this way, so we took out some of our roasts, beef roasts from the fridge. And these are our rump roast and round roast, stuff that's a little tougher, stuff that you would normally cook for a while, like making a pot roast or something like that. That way you can cook it down and tenderize it a little bit. But we saved all our chuck roast because they've got some nice marbling in them. So we're just using the round and the rump roast. So what we're going to do is we're going to can this meat up. And if you've never had canned meat before and you think it's weird, it's not. It's just cooked meat, all it is. It's cooked meat in a jar. So cooked meat is good to have around because it's already cooked, it's already tenderized, and you can put a meal on the table pretty darn quick. And it'll taste like you've been cooking it all day long because that meat is so tender. And that's what it does in this pressure canner when we're cooking it. And we're going to leave this basic. I mean, you can add flavors to this if you'd like. You can throw in onions or garlic or whatever flavoring you want to put. You could throw barbecue sauce in with it and have barbecue beef. But we leave it plain. And the reason we do that is so we can develop whatever flavor profile we want with the same jar of meat. We're not stuck with barbecue beef or whatever the end product would be. We can take this canned meat, which we're going to do a basic flavor profile with just some seasoning, so it just doesn't taste like boiled meat. It's got a little flavor. But when we take that out, we can turn it into tacos, we can turn it into spaghetti, we can turn it into beef stroganoff. We can turn it into chili. We can turn it into anything we want. We could dump it over some noodles. What I like doing is sauteing up some mushrooms and some onions and some garlic. And then once they're ready to go, you dump the meat in there, heat it up. You can pour that over noodles. Fantastic meal. Throw in a little sour cream in that mix, and you got beef stroganoff, and so on and so on. You can see where we're going with this. So that's why we leave it plain. So we can do anything we want with it. We can go any direction we want. But you can go any direction you want. If you want to make the finished product in the jar, you can. Not a big deal. So we got the meat out. We've got it weighed out. And we've got about 11 pounds of meat here. And I have these jars raring to go. We've filled them with water and put them in the canner to make sure the number of jars we wanted to do would fit. And I've got water in the jars, so that allows us to put water in the canner without the jars floating around. And then I can see my final water level. Once these are full and we put them in here, I like to maintain our water level about halfway up in the canner. And I always start with hot water so it doesn't take as long to heat up. So we got the water level right in there. We're going to dump these jars out. We got hot water in those. They've all been cleaned. And because we've got 11 pounds, these jars that I have here are 1.5 pints. So that is about 1.5 pounds of meat in each jar. Remember the old saying, a pint is a pound the world around? So you figure a pint of material, which is 2 cups. A cup is 8 ounces, so 2 cups would be 16 ounces. So 16 ounces of the pound. Now that's not always true because you got fluid ounces and you got volume ounces or dry ounces. The only time that it's exactly the same is when you're doing water or some liquidy material or something that's about the same density as water. And remember, our bodies are about 80-90% water. So it's got about the same density as water, so you can kind of count on that. But any kind of liquid in there, you're going to be right around the weight of water. So remember, a pint is a pound. So we're doing 1.5 pint jars. They're not very common, but we found some in the canning shortage. There's not so much of a canning shortage going on right now. I think all the toilet paper hoarders and the gas hoarders now have given up on the canning jars, so we're able to get some canning jars again. So each jar we do is going to be about 1.5 pounds of meat. So we took 11 pounds and we divided that by 1.5 or 1.5 pounds, and it came up to be about 7 jars. So about 7 of these jars are going to be full. If we don't have enough to fill that 7th jar, I'll just use that meat for dinner tonight. We'll do a stir fry or something like that. But you want a good full jar, and we're going to leave a 1-inch headspace in these jars, and we're going to cold pack, just like we did if you watched the beef stew video, because this is going to cook for 90 minutes in this pressure canner, and that meat's going to come out like it's been cooked all day long. It's going to be so tender. And we'll show you along the way. We'll get the meat cut up. We'll put our little seasonings that we're going to put in the jar, and we'll lit them up and we'll get them in here. So we'll see you back when we got that going on. So we're getting our meat cut up, and I wanted to show you something. Anytime you run across some of this silver skin or gristle in this meat, you want to trim that out. That stuff is crazy, crazy tough. You'll notice you can't even hardly cut through it. You can see I sliced some of the meat off of that. So now I'll come in behind this and I'll cut right here and slice that piece out. Brandy the Wonder Dog will chew on that for a while. This dog is crazy interested. Every time I start cutting meat, she can smell it a mile away, and she does not leave my side. So she may get a little treat here in a little bit. But you'll even see if you give it to your dog, they'll have to gnaw on that for a while. But you can tell, and I can tell, cutting these cheaper pieces of meat, even when you're cutting them up, they're not tender. And that's the kind of meat you want to use for this canning, because the canning process tenderizes it a lot. If you've ever tried to barbecue like a round steak, you'll know what I'm talking about. Trying to chew through that's like shoe leather most of the time. But it's great for this stuff. Alright, we started packing our jars. And before I pack every jar, I put a teaspoon of seasoning in the jar. And you can use whatever seasoning you like. Most people just use salt. So for a quart jar, you're going to use a teaspoon of salt. For a pint jar, which is half of a quart, you're going to use a half a teaspoon of salt. But I used a full teaspoon in this 1.5 pints because this isn't complete salt. It's got other items in it. So I'm going ahead and doing a full teaspoon in this 1.5 pints. And this is my favorite seasoning. It's got a really good profile to it. It's got a little onions, got a little, just about everything in it. You can see some of the stuff there. But it's one of my favorite seasonings, and I always buy the red cap. You can get this stuff online on Amazon. But the red cap is the original seasoning. It's got the regular amount of salt in it because you can get the less salt. But the reason I put it on the bottom is because as these bottles start to boil, the vapor developed in the bottom of that bottle is going to carry all the way to the top, and it'll bring those flavors all the way up through the top. Whereas if you just put it on top, it may just create a super seasoned area right on top of your jar that you don't want. So we're packing these with 1 inch of headspace. And I've on my 6 jars, so we're going to be real close to the 7 jars that I guessed at. So let's see what we come up with. So you can see our pint is a pound formula came out pretty spot on. We have 7 jars at a 1.5 pounds, 1.5 pints per jar. And we filled them right up to the shoulder on the jar. And this is all we had left, 3 little pieces. Brandy! Comes running. What do you think of that? Your lucky day. You've died and gone to heaven, huh? Yummy. It's all this blood you see in here and all the blood that was left over in those butcher bags. If you take that and throw it in the skillet, maybe throw a little salt on it, just a little bit, and brown it up for your dog. It'll coagulate and get brown like when you're cooking pork chops. Let it cool and feed that to your dog. Don't let it go to waste. They will thank you, and it's got a lot of good nutrients in it for them. So we're going to lid these babies up and we're going to put them in the canner. I should have already had the fire going on underneath this. I'll turn it on right now. My bad. So we're not going to throw those in there until it comes to a boil. Everything's cold packed, so it's fine. It was super cold coming out of the fridge, so we're all good. See you back in a bit. So those of you that are wondering at this point if we're going to put liquid in those jars, we are not. That meat is going to cook down and it's going to create its own juice in that jar. And because we packed it very tightly, that's going to be plenty of material in that jar, and it's still going to be around 1 inch of headspace when we're done. These 2 jars that we did not fill, we're going to put water in, and we'll put them in the canner just to take up space because we don't want bottles falling around in the canner. But I'm not going to lid these up till right before I put them in, and we'll be good to go. Now, the other reason, a good reason to use cheap cuts for this is because it's tough, it'll hold up to the canning process. If you were to take like a fillet, which I don't know why you would, but if you were to cut up a fillet and put into these jars, it's so tender when you pull it out, it's just going to be mush. So the cheaper cuts hold up to the canning process, and you'll still have like a piece of meat you can bite into. It'll be super tender, but it'll hold together and it won't be just a big jar of mush. Now, go to the store, look at the discount bin at the store, at the butcher counter or wherever, even at the butcher shop if they've got a discount area. Buy that discounted meat and can it. If you can get it under $2 a pound, you need to put that stuff away for those times when you can't get that $2 a pound meat. And we cut this meat up into about 1 to 1.5 inch square pieces, which is about right. And we packed it in there tight. It's in there pretty snug. So we'll come back when we load the canner and we'll tell you what to do with that. Now, you can do this with more than just beef. You can do this with any kind of meat or fish or whatever. Obviously, there may be a different process for fish or something like that, but for meat, it's generally about the same. The only difference is if you're doing chicken with the bones in it, you would cook it at the a little bit less time. Consult whatever recipe you're using, but I think boneless will be around the same time as beef, around 90 minutes. With the bone, for some reason, I guess it's not as much meat. You can cook them or pressure can them for a little less. I highly recommend, if you've never canned before, like us, we're going to be canning a lot more stuff this year than we've ever canned, and I'm going to be canning some items I've never canned before. So I bought me a book, The Amish Canning Cookbook by Georgia Veroza. It's got some really cool recipes in it. It's really straightforward, and if you've never canned before, it's got great directions in it, but it'll give you all the different times and everything for your altitudes and stuff like that. And it may have recipes. There's recipes for just about everything in this book that you can imagine. So if you've never canned before, get your book. It's got good recipes in it, and generally you can dink around with the recipes and make them your own and change the flavors up. But the thing you don't want to mess with is the canning times and stuff like that. That needs to stay the same. Now obviously meat is low acid, like we talked about in our last video, so we're pressure canning the meat. If you're going to do spices in your meat, I recommend doing just a basic flavor profile with salt or maybe the seasoning like I showed you. But if for some reason you want to can sausage or hamburger or something like that, you stay away from the sage, because the sage gets really bitter when it's canned. But there's other spices and herbs that you can throw in there with no problem. But I think you'll be happier if you just can with the basic profile, and then you're not locked into whatever flavor profile you put into that jar. Now because meat has kind of a greasy texture to it, a paper towel and a little bit of vinegar, and we're going to wipe the tops of these jars down, just in case any material got on the top of those jars. Just kind of cleans it up a little bit. Make sure there's nothing coming between that sealing surface and the lid. So we're wiping them down. Now if you have a food that's not like a greasy food, say you're doing fruit or something like that, you don't have to use vinegar. You can take your paper towel and just dip it in the boiling water in the can and run it around the top. It's fine as long as you're cleaning that off and you stay fairly sterile doing it. However, remember with the steam canning, it's going to sterilize everything in that steam canner being in there for 90 minutes. So you don't have to worry as much about bacteria, but just wanted to get any greasy stuff that was on top of the rim. Now, as this boils out of the jar and vents a little bit, you're going to get a little greasy stuff go through the lid, but it should still seal. So let's lid these babies up and get them ready to go into the canner. So we've got the jars in. Remember, always put a filler jar in if you need to keep those jars from tipping over in the canner. We're going to put the lid on and lock her down. We're going to wait till steam starts escaping from the vent. We have it open in the open position right now. And it takes about 10 minutes for the steam to build to where it evacuates all the air. As soon as we got a pretty steady supply of steam coming out of that vent, we'll close that down. We'll bring this gauge up to 12 pounds, which is what I need for my altitude. Check out Google for the altitude requirements of your area. And we're going to run it at 12 pounds for 90 minutes for quarts. It's 75 minutes for pints. So I'm going to split the difference. It's either a pint and a half. And we're going to do right around 80-85 minutes, which should be fine. I think that the timing has more to do with the thickness of the jars. And these pint and a half jars are the same width as a pint jar. It is not as wide as a quart jar. So I think we're going to be just fine. While we're waiting for that steam to build up in that canner in the kitchen, we wanted to welcome our new subscribers this week. We got Vince J and ID Wolverine and Ricky Rick. Welcome y'all to our channel. We hope you enjoy it. And if you're here for the knife videos, like I said, I promise I'll get back out in that shop soon. We're just doing some indoor stuff because it's muddy out there right now. And maybe we'll get out to that shop tomorrow and we'll get that knife going. Now, if you think your canner is taking a long time to start steaming and come up to temperature, that is normal. Remember, everything that we put in there was cold. So everything in that pot needs to come up to temperature before you'll start building steam. So don't be concerned. As long as your pressure gauge is at 0 and there's no steady bunch of steam coming out of here, you can even lift up on this a little bit to make sure you're fine. You see there's a little bit of steam coming out of there, but we're going to wait until that's a good solid stream of steam coming out. All right, we got a good amount of steam coming out of here, so we're going to close this. And that pressure will start to build. And when we get to 12 pounds, we'll start, like I told you before in the other videos, we'll throttle the, the burner, the gas to the burner, bring it down a little bit at a time to maintain 12. And with this stove, we're going to be end up between medium and medium low. But do not start your timer until that gauge reads 12. Also, before we put the lid on, we flip the gasket over on the inside. Remember I said that's a great idea because that gets a memory with the lid sitting on here and it may not seal. So once you turn it over, it'll seal. Now if you're having any problems building pressure, run your hands, don't touch the pot, but run your hand around the pot. And if you feel any steam escaping around the outside, you don't have a good seal and you're probably not going to build enough pressure. It may build 2 or 3 pounds, but it's not going to build. So if you didn't flip that, that's probably your issue. You got to turn the burner off, vent this thing out completely before you open it. Take the gasket out, flip it over, seal it back up, and start over, and it should seal it for you. But save yourself a lot of headache and do it beforehand. The pressure gauge on a steam canner is the most important item on the canner. That's what controls this whole process. We recently put a new pressure gauge on this canner. I don't know if you've noticed, this is different from the canner we've been using. I put that one away and I switched over to this one because I don't like to use any one of them too much. So kind of spread it around. But you can still get parts for these canners. You can get the gaskets, you can get pressure gauges, you can get the vents and everything. Most of your canners will have the numbers on them, so, and the names. So this is a Model A Steamliner pressure cooker. So if you put that into your Google search, you'll be able to get parts. People still use these things extensively, so they're still making parts for them. If you're ever wondering if your gauge is correct, there is ways to calibrate those gauges. That is a pipe fitting on the bottom of that gauge. It's either 1/8 or 1/4 inch pipe fitting. So if you have a husband or a spouse or an aunt or uncle or whoever that's pretty handy, and they have a workshop and they have an air compressor, have them set their air compressor to like 10 or 15 pounds of pressure. The pressure regulator on the compressor, any good compressor will have one. So make sure you don't over pressurize it. So that's why I'm saying you need a regulator. And then screw some pipe fittings together, take the gauge out. If they have little pipe fittings laying around, it's pretty easily. Just get a couple couplers put together on the air chuck. And then you can pressurize that gauge. And if you got your regulator on your air compressor set to 10 pounds, it should read 10 pounds on that gauge. So that's a good way to calibrate it and good way to check it if you know somebody that's pretty handy or you got a husband that can do that kind of stuff. You could probably find somebody that professionally that can do it, but it would probably cost you a little money. Probably cheaper just to buy a new gauge. It's peanut butter jelly time. Got some fresh elderberry jelly from a place we like to go called the Secret Garden. Lunchtime. Now let's talk about jars. A lot of people back in the day used to save their old mayonnaise jars, their quart jars, and use those for canning. They have the same threads on top. Problem is those jars aren't as durable as regular canning jars, even though they're canned at the factory. They're not designed to take some of the thermal shock that these jars will take in the canning process. Like when we put the jars into this boiling water, even though I hung them over the steaming water for a little bit to let them kind of get acclimated before I put them in, if you go put cold jars into boiling water, that's a lot of thermal shock and you take the chance of breaking the jar. And if you had a lighter weight like a mayonnaise type jar, you might not get away with that. You might not get away with the pressures. Now a lot of people probably maybe just use them for water bath canning, which you may be able to pull that off. It's not such as an intense pressure and not as hot in a water bath as it is in this steam canner. So you might be able to pull that off. In a pinch, you know, what are you going to do? The jar will break and you'll lose some food. It would be the only problem. I mean, it's not crazy dangerous unless it breaks when you're handling them hot. But if you stay away from the thermal shock, leave those jars in the canner until they cool. You don't have to worry about lifting them into the cold air and getting that thermal shock. Remember, don't put them on a cold counter. Make sure there's a towel down. But I don't recommend using the mayonnaise jars. I know my mom did a few times for a few things, but use regular canning jars. All right, we've reached our 12 psi. So we're going to start our time. I set it at around 83 minutes. Is kind of where we need to be. Kind of halfway between the quarts and the pint time. And we need to start throttling this back. So I'm going to go down to medium first on your dial. If you've got the crazy big burners on those gas stoves nowadays, you may want to just start on medium. Don't even go to high. Think of your steam pressure as a freight train. It takes a long time to slow down. So you might want to stay on medium with a super big burner. But these little tiny burners here, I can start it right out on high and I'm good. It's not going to overcook this quick at all. So down on medium, and we're going to have to go just a little bit lower than that. Now, until you find the sweet spot of your stove, bring you a chair into the kitchen, turn on the classic rock, and play on your phone. Don't plan on doing anything for the next 90 minutes. Stick around. Don't let this thing go. Now once you find your sweet spot and you've used it several times, this is only my about third time of steam canning on this stove. So I kind of know where I'm at, medium, medium low, right in between there. And then you can walk away for 5 minutes or something like that. If you get a little above, like we're doing 12 pounds here, like I said, look up your pressure for your area. If you get a little above the pressure, it's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. If you get below, though, they say you need to start completely over. I don't buy into that completely. I kind of stop the time if it gets below, and when I get back to pressure, I'll restart it. I don't restart the whole process, but I think that's fine. I've never had a problem doing that. So we're maintaining 12 pounds right now, and we'll keep her there. You don't want to go crazy too long, like say restarting your time 4 or 5 times where you end up you're cooking a half hour longer. You're going to start overcooking your food and it'll turn to mush. So keep an eye on it. Alright, the timer went off. We turned the fire off. Pressure's coming down. We're going to let that come all the way down to 0, and then we'll open the vent. Alright, pressure's all the way down to 0. Let's open the vent. You're going to hear some steam come out of here. Well, apparently it's that longer than I thought. Usually you'll get a little steam out of there if you catch it quick enough. But there's no steam in there. The lid should be loose. So let's give it a little spin here. The lid's moving fine, so we'll pop that open. And I'm going to rest the lid right on top, just leaving it slightly ajar just for a little bit. So we got the lid open. You see a little bit of steam coming out of there, not much. You got to be careful when you open it. Open it away from you and not towards you. So we're just letting a little bit of cooler air rush in there a little bit. Well, not rush, but seep in there. And then once the little bit of the colder air has come in there, we can pull that lid all the way off. Now, when this meat cools off in the jar and you get it put down in the root cellar or wherever you're going to keep it in a nice, cool, dark place if you got it. What little fat was in that meat is going to cool off and kind of rise to the surface and re-harden on the surface. And you'll have this white layer of fat on top of the jar. It's not going to be that attractive, but that's not a problem. It may look bad, but it's not an issue. Your stuff hasn't gone bad. It's just a layer of fat on top. Once you open the jar, if you want to get into more low-fat food or whatever, you can skim that coagulated layer or hardened layer of fat off the top of the jar, and you got less fat in your food. All right, we've got the lid off. We took that thinner spacer jar out. You can see we got some really good-looking product there still boiling in the jar. We'll wait till that boiling stops or almost stops before we pull it out here on the counter. Remember to have a towel down on the counter, but that's going to be good stuff. That's all there is to it. Again, not hard. There's only 2 ingredients in that jar, so that's some real quick meals right there. You got ready-made or ready-cooked meat on the shelf that you can make lots of stuff with. So give it a shot. If you got some meat or if you can find some meat on sale, get some canned up if you got a pressure canner, and you'll really enjoy having that ready-made stuff on the shelf. So leave your questions or comments. If you like our material, subscribe to us so you can see it when we post it. And like I said, we're going to get back out in the shop. But until then, stay safe, stay healthy. We love you guys. Bye-bye.